All right, welcome back. Last time we implemented our memory logging task, and it's now running as a background process, scheduled every 2 minutes. The next thing we are going to do is update our configuration to dynamically reload in the background, and you basically reconnect to the database if some of our configuration changes, and we'll generally update our configuration object whenever we push changes to GitHub in our server properties configuration. So in order to do that, I'm going to combine, we basically have two objects that we're managing as part of our system environment. We've got a config object, and then we've got a service factory. So basically both of these objects represent our system environment or our environment. So what I want to do is actually create an environment class that contains both of those. So we will make them final. Service factory. And we'll create a constructor for these. And we'll add some getters. All right, so what we're going to do is create a method that can supply an environment. Well, I should say we'll create a method that can create a supplier of an environment, and then this environment can automatically reload behind the scenes. What I want to do is have an atomic reference. So we'll keep track of the one environment object that we have available, and we'll, as we update it, we'll update it inside this reference here. And so our we'll keep this reference up to date. I'm not too concerned about race conditions and things like that, so this isn't 100% race condition proof the way I'm going to do this, but since we basically have one background thread that's updating it, so it shouldn't be an issue. We're not going to have multiple threads updating it. We're just going to have multiple threads retrieving it. So the way I'm going to do this, I'm going to use Guava. We've already brought Guava in. Yeah, so com.google.guava. We're using the latest version. So this comes from Google. It's a nice library. It's got a lot of nice utilities in it, and including things like there's a suppliers dot memoize and memoize with expiration. These are useful. We could use this. So basically we could fetch our environment whenever we need it, and then with memoize with expiration, we could say have it expire after 5 minutes. In which case, the next time we called supplier.get, we would basically pause and go fetch the latest configuration and create the new environment, and then return it, which is good in a lot of situations, but we don't want our web requests from a customer kind of pausing while we go fetch updated configuration information from GitHub. So we want that update to be in the background, so that way we'll always return immediately the latest environment, except for the very first time when we load it for the very first time. But after that, we'll refresh it as a background process, or in a background process. So we're not going to use this memoize suppliers. What we are going to use is a loading cache. So a loading cache, you basically have a key and then the value that you're caching for that key. We're only going to have one environment that we're caching, so I'm going to use a Boolean as the key and just use true. So the value is going to be an environment. there's a cache builder, .new builder, and so we'll do expire after write. So basically, after we've written an environment into our cache, it will expire after, for example, 5 minutes. I'll make it 1 minute. Well, I'll make it 2 minutes just for initial testing. All right, so there's our expiration, and then we'll build it, and we need to provide a cache loader. So we'll do an asynchronous loader, which, as I said, it will do reloads in the background asynchronously, and while that background task is running, it will go ahead and return the current one. And then once the background task finishes and a new one's available, then it will cache the new one in place of the old one. So that way you don't ever have to wait while that reload is happening. You'll get the old one kind of immediately. So we'll do this one. Now this takes a normal cache loader that just loads the object, and then it takes an executor. So I need an executor here. So we'll do cache loader .from, and we'll have a supplier that returns an environment, which I'll just return null for now, and we need to pass in our executor. So that's going to be the general outline, and then we'll update the contents of this supplier here in a second. So we need to return a supplier that can kind of do this behind the scenes. So I'll return a new supplier, lambda. What we're going to do here is call loading cache.get. I'll pass in true. This should return an environment object. This does throw an exception, so we'll surround it with a try catch. Oops. We'll do some logging. All right, we'll do that. And we'll return this created environment, but we'll also environment ref dot set environment. Now, in order to do that, this actually needs to be static. Okay. So basically what this is doing, we'll return a supplier. Whenever get is called on it, we'll go through this work here. We'll fetch the current environment from the cache. We'll update our environment reference to set that value. And then we'll return the environment. So meanwhile, our loading cache will do the background work of actually making sure we have an environment available. So for our environment, there's a few things we want to do inside there. We want to do these two config things. So we basically need to load the configuration. Let's move this URL up here. All right, so we're going to need the mode to pass in here. So let's add that as a parameter. And we'll use our config URL pattern here. We'll inject the mode into it. So that'll give us our URL. Then we'll use that URL to fetch a configuration. We need to catch this malformed URL exception. And we will throw in a runtime exception if that happens. All right, we'll move this return up in here. All right, so now we have a config. I don't always want to update the environment. I only want to update the environment if our config has actually changed, right? So, if we have database connections and connection pools and all that, I don't want to rebuild all that and reconnect to the database every time, right? Every 2 minutes in the case that we're getting web requests that frequently. So what I want to do is compare the current configuration to this new configuration that we just fetched. Potentially, the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to look in the environment ref. So potentially there isn't anything in the environment ref, meaning we just started the server. So let's check for that case. If environment ref dot get is null, so if it's null, then we need to load the environment for the first time, or create the environment. Else, if our environment does exist, which it will since we have an else here, .get config. Let's create a method to compare configs. So something like has changed, and we'll pass the old config in and the new config. So if that method that we haven't created yet, but that we will create, returns true, we can say reloading environment since config changed. All right, and just for testing, I'll put an else in here. And I'll delete this after we do some initial testing to make sure this works. Okay, so if we need to load the environment, then we'll return a new environment with our current config and our new service factory that we need to create. Otherwise, we'll return the existing config, the existing environment from our environment ref. Okay, so that makes sense. We need the ability to create a service factory. Let's go steal that code from our API application. And we'll drop that in here. So we can create service factory based on our new config. We also need this has changed method. Let's go ahead and create that. All right, so let's do old config dot entry set dot sorted, or I guess dot stream dot sorted. And we these are entries, so we can do map dot entry dot comparing by key. There we go, comparing by key. Dot let's map each one to a string to make it easier to compare. So we've got entry dot get key render, and then let's collect adjoining on a new line. We'll do the same thing for the new config, and we can actually log these out just to verify what our strings look like. And we can return old config not equals to new config. So if they're not equal, then that means it has changed. And if it has changed, that means we want to load the environment. And if we need to load the environment, then we'll create a new one based on the current config that we just downloaded and a new service factory that we'll create based on that config. Okay, so this looks good. Now all we need to do is actually call this create environment method up here in our server. We can get rid of these. We will do it here. So environment dot create environment. We need an executor. So we have a scheduled executor service. And we need the mode. And this returns a supplier of an environment. Okay, so now we basically need to update our Jetty server to take our environment supplier. All right, we've got this config here, so let's fetch our environment and use the config inside of it for our key store stuff. Now this is something that, since we're doing this here when the server starts, if that configuration changes in GitHub, we're not actually going to reload our server and restart our server key store. So those are some configurations that we're not going to support reloading. We will support reloading these database configurations and this RabbitAPI proxy secret though. Since we're basically if these change, we're going to see, or if anything changes, we're going to recreate our service factory, which will solve this, and we'll pass our environment supplier into our security filter so that it can check this API proxy secret every time. But yeah, these ones aren't going to be reloaded. We're not going to bounce the server if we change our key store configuration. So let's do environment supplier.get config like that. That gives us a config to fetch this information from on startup. Okay, so now our server should be good to go. All this looks good. Let's get rid of this method here. We no longer want to create pretty much anything in our API application. We want to take a supplier of an environment, environment supplier. Now, environment doesn't actually exist in our REST package, so I want to move this environment, I guess, up here into model, because we're not going to use environment in our database code because we're creating our default service factory somewhere else. So all it needs is a data source. We don't actually need any environment configuration. So we could put our environment in REST, and that would be okay, because we could see it inside our server here. Yeah, let's do that. So I'm just going to drag and drop this up here. All right, so now we have our environment. Let's update this. Let's get rid of these things. And here we'll do, so instead of binding config and service factory so that our REST endpoints can bring these in, let's bind our environment supplier to it instead. So let's get rid of that. Bind environment supplier dot names. Now we might have other suppliers in the future, so I'm going to give this a name, right? Because we might, yeah, it's hard to imagine the future, but supplier is a generic Java util function. So what I don't want is just to bind to supplier. I want to bind to a named supplier. So I'll call it environment supplier. Like that. All right, so this looks good. We will have to fix the places where we were using those bound objects in places where we injected them. We've got tests that call this constructor as well. We'll have to fix those. All right, here's one place where we need to not pass config in, but pass environment supplier. In fact, let me break this into 2 lines. Like that, and that looks good. All right, let's go ahead and do a build and find out where our current compile problems are so we can fix them. Okay, all of our REST endpoint integration tests are attempting to take these 2 old parameters in. We need a parameter that's an environment. So let's update this very easily. New environment, like so. So it actually needs to be a supplier, not just an environment. So let me fake it like that. I'll copy paste this line and go to the next one and the next one. A little bit of copy pasting exercise and then just waiting for the imports to happen. And the last one. All right, let's go ahead and rebuild. All right, that looks good. So now we need to fix the places that have inject and take, like this here. So let's get rid of these. Bring that in. Let's do that. And now down here, instead of just calling service factory directly, we need to do environment supplier.get service factory, which made this line a lot longer. It's still pretty long. Let's go ahead and static import that and hope that we don't have too many static imports for our PMD warnings. Okay. All right, so we've got our environment supplier there. We need to do a similar thing here. Like that. We do have, okay, so this is looking good. There are places like in our tests where we're calling this. So let's do that. We'll break it there instead. We'll have to do something similar down here. Okay, we'll do something similar here. I'll let that one go. It's only one character over. looks like we're not using this principal. What is this warning here? We don't actually need these braces. All right, that's fine. Okay, so there's our security filter. Let's do another build just to make sure. Let's also look for inject. All right, here's an inject. For our service factory, we can't inject service factory anymore. We need to actually inject environment supplier. And we need to use the named one. Like that, I think. All right, do a little bit of copy pasting there. Inject, inject, inject. Here's a, let me change this to @inject. All right, so here's one. All right, we'll do that. No, I didn't actually. Are we not using this? I don't see any errors down through here. Oh, they just don't show up here. So here we need to do environment supplier .get service factory. Same thing there. Or I could just call it once and get the service factory once. I guess I will do that. Like that, okay. This should actually be private final. Oh, that's the wrong one. What was this? All right, anyway. All right, there we go. Got our copy pasting down. There we go. Pretty much just a copy paste exercise. All right, that's one character over, but we'll let it go. All right, let's do that. Oh, we already did this one. Let's come down here and fix this. I'm not sure why that one's gray. That one should be imported. it needs to be imported. Definitely recommend learning Vim. Makes this a little bit easier. Oh, I already have this one. So I already updated this one. That's our security folder. All right, all this looks good. Let's do a build. Let's see if IntelliJ has any compilation problems. All right, everything seems to be looking good. Let's run Maven. Let's see if it actually compiles and that the tests work. If we have any injection problems, we'll recognize those as part of our tests. All right, there is an unnecessary import and get all to-do list. That wasn't the IT, that was the resource. Okay, my auto optimize just fixed that. Let me copy and paste this RF and not Control R RF, which might be a RM-RF like that other video. All right, here's a bunch of test failures and our resources. Multi-exceptions, that means, well, let's go ahead and run them in the IntelliJ. Let's see what our exact exceptions are. It looks like every single one of them failed. Unable to perform operation, resolve, there was no object available. Okay, I did an inject here, but I forgot the name on it. Yeah, this needs to be named. Environment supplier. Okay, let's rerun all these. All right, still red. All right, there was no object available. Environment supplier. Maybe I spelled it wrong, or maybe I didn't actually name it that when I found it. Environment supplier, that looks right. I didn't see any change there. Supplier, environment, let's just run one of these. All right, we're over 30 minutes. I'll track this down offline and figure out exactly what I did incorrectly that caused this. Potentially I need to move this .named to after the two. Not sure about that. I'll try a few different things and identify exactly what this problem is. And then I'll see you in the next one. All right, thanks a lot for watching. Like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you later.